Okay, so maybe you're kind of interested in fair trucking practices, right? And like all the talk about transparency in the industry, it's definitely caught my attention.
Yeah.
We're going to do a deep dive on it
Awesome.
into proposed changes to truck broker contract rules, specifically by the FMCSA.
Okay.
That's the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration.
Right.
And we're going to be looking at an article from FreightWaves called Feds Taking Another Look at Truck Broker Contract Rules,
Hmm.
and a petition from the Small Business and Transportation Coalition,
Okay.
or SBTC.
Gotcha.
It's kind of like a David versus Goliath situation here,
Interesting.
with smaller trucking operations kind of pushing for change against some of the bigger broker companies.
Well, that sounds like it could be pretty juicy.
Yeah.
It's a fascinating, I guess you could call it a case study
Yeah.
in how regulations try to balance competing interests in a complex system.
Right. To understand what's really at stake here, let's start with the basics. What does a freight broker do? Like, what do they actually do?
Sure.
They're like the middlemen, right?
Right.
They connect shippers
Yes.
who need to move goods, obviously, with the truckers who can, well, haul them.
Yeah. That's a good way to put it. Yeah. And that middleman role, I think, is crucial
Yeah.
to keeping goods, flowing smoothly across the country.
Yeah, yeah.
But the concern, I think, is that truckers sometimes feel pressured
Okay.
to sign contracts with brokers without knowing all the details of the deal.
Really?
Yeah, the deal between the broker and the shipper.
So they don't even know how much the broker's making off that shipment.
Exactly.
Yeah.
These contracts, a lot of times they include these clauses where truckers waive their right
Wow.
to actually see the transaction records.
Huh.
And those would show, the full breakdown of the costs and everything.
So they're not even sure if they're getting a fair share or if the broker's pocketing a bunch of extra money.
That's the worry. It definitely creates a lack of trust.
Yeah, I could see that.
Yeah. And that's what the SBTC is trying to address.
Okay.
They say this lack of transparency can lead to price gouging,
Oh, wow.
where brokers take advantage of truckers who don't have all the information.
So the SBTC, they're pushing for some pretty specific changes, right?
They are.
Can you kind of break it down for us?
Yeah. They're asking for a few key things.
Okay.
First, a complete ban
Right.
on brokers requiring carriers to waive their right to review those transaction records
Oh.
we were just talking about. Second, clear language added to contracts stating that brokers must comply with existing transparency requirements.
So no more hiding behind vague contract terms.
Exactly. No more of that. And finally, they want brokers to automatically provide transaction information to truckers within 48 hours of a job's completion.
Oh, wow. Okay. So that sounds like it would give truckers a much clearer picture of, where the money's going and everything.
Yes, absolutely.
What's interesting to me is this isn't about creating new rules. It's about enforcing the existing ones and making sure that information is accessible.
That's a really good point. The SBTC is arguing the current rules are fine in theory, but they just aren't being consistently applied
Oh, okay.
or enforced, which leaves truckers at a disadvantage.
So where does the FMCSA stand on this? They put forward a proposed rule, but it doesn't go as far as the SBTC wants, right?
Right. The FMCSA's proposal, it aims to give truckers more leverage, in these contract negotiations.
Okay.
But it stops short of implementing all of the SBTC's requests.
Like what? Can you give us an example?
Sure. Like while they encourage transparency, they're not outright banning those waiver clauses.
Why not? I mean, why not just go all the way?
Well, this is where those competing interests we talked about come in.
Oh, okay.
The FMCSA has to consider the impact on brokers as well.
So they're pushing back against this regulation.
Well, the Transportation Intermediaries Association, or TIA, which represents the brokers, they argue that these changes would be an unreasonable burden on their members.
So what's their argument? Like, what's the main thing they're saying?
They claim there's no evidence of widespread problems with brokers taking advantage of truckers.
Okay.
And they're calling this rule a solution in search of a problem.
Wow.
They're also worried about, the paperwork,
Mm-hmm.
the administrative costs
Right.
that stricter transparency requirements would bring, which could lead to higher costs for everyone.
That's interesting. So, I mean, on one hand, you have truckers saying they're being kept in the dark, potentially losing money.
Yeah.
And then on the other hand, you have brokers saying these regulations are just unnecessary and they're just going to cause more headaches and expenses.
Right.
It seems like the FMCSA is kind of stuck in the middle, trying to find a compromise.
It does, doesn't it?
But how effective will that be, you know?
That's a good question.
That compromise.
Yeah. And James Lamb, the executive director of the SBTC, he seems to have some serious doubts. He even said, and I quote, "Something is very wrong with the way the FMCSA is handling this."
Okay. He seems pretty frustrated. Why is the SBTC so skeptical?
Well, they point to a recent case
Okay.
where the FMCSA actually had to step in and force a major broker to remove a waiver clause.
Really?
Yeah, from a contract with one of their carriers.
Hmm.
They see this as proof that the system isn't working.
So they're basically saying if the FMCSA is already having to intervene case by case, doesn't that mean they need broader regulation?
Yeah, you could definitely see it that way.
It definitely adds more fuel to the fire. This whole debate, I mean, we're not just talking about like contract technicalities, are we?
No.
We're talking about the livelihoods of truckers and like the whole supply chain.
You got it.
And let's not forget the impact on consumers. If these regulations lead to higher costs for brokers, those costs are probably going to trickle down to us, right?
Absolutely. Higher prices for goods.
Yeah. So this debate, this whole thing, raises questions about the trade-offs between transparency and efficiency
It does.
in a system like trucking.
Yes. We can't ignore the concerns of these truckers, who feel like they're being taken advantage of, but we also have to be mindful of the potential consequences.
It's a tough situation.
Yeah.
The FMCSA's decision is going to have a ripple effect throughout the whole industry.
It will.
And it's not just the FMCSA making these types of decisions, right?
No, not at all.
We're seeing this everywhere, this debate.
In all sorts of industries.
With the push for transparency, it's everywhere.
Yeah, as that push for greater transparency and fairness kind of gains momentum.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Consumers are becoming more discerning, right?
Yeah.
And they're demanding more accountability from companies.
They are. They want to know where their products are coming from, how they're made.
It's like this ripple effect, this heightened awareness. It's causing businesses to really rethink how they do things.
Absolutely. And how they interact with workers, suppliers, consumers, everybody.
This has been really eye-opening.
It has.
I mean, this whole issue about truck broker transparency, I hadn't really thought about it much before.
It's amazing how a seemingly niche issue can lead to all these bigger questions.
Yeah, it really is. It really is. What stood out to you most from all of this?
I think, honestly, the potential for technology to kind of step in and help.
Oh, interesting.
We often see how technology can make problems worse.
Uh-huh.
But I think in this case, it could be really good for promoting transparency and fairness in the industry.
So instead of more regulation, maybe we need more innovation.
It's about finding that sweet spot, that balance between regulation and innovation.
And make the system more equitable and sustainable.
Exactly. So what do you think all this means for the future of the trucking industry?
And the supply chain, right, the whole thing.
I think transparency will become the standard.
Do you think so?
I do. Consumers are demanding it, and businesses are realizing it's good business. It's not just good ethics, it's good business.
The companies that figure that out are going to be the ones that do really well.
I think so.
Yeah.
Transparency builds trust, and trust is everything.
This deep dive has given me a lot to think about. The trucking industry may not be the most exciting topic, but it's really important to our everyday lives. And it's facing some big challenges.
It is.
And also some big opportunities.
Big opportunities, yeah. It's a microcosm of these larger shifts that are happening in business as we grapple with, fairness and transparency and sustainability.
Right.
And what happens here in the trucking industry will have ripple effects everywhere.
It really shows how interconnected we all are.
It does.
And that the choices we make as consumers and businesses and even policymakers have a real impact.
Yeah.
It encourages us to be more mindful, to ask questions.
Yeah. Seek out information.
To advocate for transparency.
Yeah. Make informed decisions.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it really highlights how everything's connected.
Right. Yeah, it's like a domino effect.
Exactly. Let's say hypothetically, right? A trucking company has to raise its rates.
Okay.
Because they're dealing with these higher broker fees from the new regulations, all the administrative burden.
I see.
And then that company passes those higher costs onto the shipper.
Uh-huh.
And then, of course, the shipper has to raise the price of their product.
To keep their profits up.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So who ends up paying for it in the end?
The consumer.
The consumer, every time. So, yeah, this might seem like it's just about truckers and brokers.
Right.
But it really affects all of us.
It does, yeah. And it makes you wonder, I mean, is more regulation always the answer?
That's the question, isn't it?
Or can we find a way to have more transparency and fairness without messing up the whole supply chain.
Right. And driving up costs for everyone.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we want to protect truckers,
Of course.
make sure they're getting a fair deal,
Absolutely.
but we don't want to create a system that's just bogged down with all this red tape
Yeah, no one wants that.
and then ends up hurting consumers.
Right. The SBTC says these concerns about too much regulation, they're overblown.
Okay.
They point out that brokers already collect a ton of data.
Yeah, that's true.
So providing more transparency wouldn't really mean a lot more paperwork.
So it's more about making sure truckers can see that data.
Yeah. They say it's about access to information, not necessarily more administrative work.
Makes sense, but the TIA obviously sees it differently.
They do?
Do they offer any other solutions, or are they just totally against more regulation?
Well, they say that brokers are crucial
Okay.
to matching shippers with carriers and keeping everything moving smoothly.
Right.
And they think that too much regulation could mess that up.
Hurt the whole industry?
Exactly. So they're basically saying just leave it alone.
A hands-off approach?
Well, not exactly.
Okay.
They know there needs to be some oversight,
Okay.
but they say it's important to find solutions that don't stifle innovation or make things too hard for brokers.
So what would that look like?
Well, they suggest focusing on more trust and collaboration within the industry,
Okay.
maybe through voluntary initiatives
Mm.
or technology-based solutions.
Like what kind of solutions are we talking about?
Well, imagine a digital platform
Okay, yeah.
gives truckers real-time information
Oh, wow.
about market rates for different routes, average broker fees, even reviews of brokers from other truckers.
That would be amazing. It would give so much power to the truckers.
Exactly. They can make much better decisions about which loads to take and who to work with.
And wouldn't it also be good for brokers?
It could be, yeah.
By making communication easier and, creating a more transparent marketplace?
Exactly where trust is built on open access to information.
I think that the TIA would be much happier with that kind of approach.
I think so, yeah. Instead of all these new regulations they see as potentially harmful.
Right, so they want solutions that help both sides.
Yeah, truckers and brokers while keeping the industry running smoothly.
So now it's up to the FMCSA to decide what to do.
All right, they've got a lot of pressure from both sides.
Yeah, and they both have good points. It's a tough situation.
It is. It really shows how complicated it is to regulate an industry like trucking.
Yeah, because it's so important to our economy.
Exactly. And it reminds us that there are rarely easy answers.
Right.
Every decision has trade-offs. The FMCSA will have to think about everyone.
Truckers, brokers, consumers.
Yeah, they've got a tough balancing act ahead of them.
And like we were saying, this isn't just happening with the FMCSA.
Nope, this kind of debate is happening all over.
As the push for transparency gets stronger.
Consumers are getting more and more aware.
Yeah, and they're demanding more from the companies they do business with. It's like a ripple effect, changing how businesses operate and interact with everyone.
It's really interesting to watch all these changes in the business world.
This deep dive has been really great.
It has.
I'm learning so much about an issue I never really considered before.
It's amazing how this one question about transparency in trucking
Right.
can lead to such a big discussion.
About fairness and technology and the future of the supply chain.
Yeah, it really shows how interconnected everything is.
What's been the biggest takeaway for you from all this?
I think it's the potential for technology to help solve these problems.
Oh, interesting.
We've seen how technology can sometimes make things worse,
Right.
but here it could really be a force for good.
You think so?
I do. Especially for promoting transparency and fairness in trucking.
It's like a counterbalance to too much regulation.
Yeah, instead of just relying on the government to step in, maybe technology can offer more flexible and adaptable solutions.
That's a good point. So what do you think all of this means for the future of trucking and the supply chain?
I think it means that transparency is going to become the norm.
Really?
I think the consumers are demanding it, and businesses are realizing that it just makes sense.
Good ethics, good business.
Exactly. The companies that figure that out, they're the ones who are going to succeed.
I agree. Transparency builds trust. And trust is essential for any healthy business.
Absolutely. We've seen what happens when there's a lack of transparency.
Mistrust, conflict.
Exactly. But by encouraging open communication and access to information, we can create a much better environment.
More collaborative, more equitable.
Exactly.
Yeah.
This deep dive has really given me a lot to think about.
Me too. Trucking may not be the most glamorous industry,
No, it's not.
but it's incredibly important to our economy and our lives.
Absolutely. And it's going to be fascinating to see what happens in the years ahead.
It really is a microcosm of all these big changes happening in business.
Is fairness, transparency, sustainability. It's all connected.
And the decisions made in this industry will impact us all.
They will. It's a reminder that we're all connected and that our choices matter.
As consumers, as businesses, as policymakers.
Exactly. It's an invitation to be more mindful, to ask questions, to seek out information that empowers us,
To make better
to
choices.
create positive change.
This whole push for transparency, how do you think it'll change the trucking industry, long term?
It's a big shift, I think, in how we think about accountability and fairness in the whole supply chain. This focus on transparency in trucking, it's kind of like it's a small part of a much bigger trend
Okay.
across industries, really.
Hmm.
Consumers want to know more, like where their products are coming from, how they're made, who benefits along the way, all that.
It's like a domino effect. So do you think this transparency trend, is it a good thing?
Yeah, I'm optimistic. Transparency can be a really strong force for change, right? When businesses are more open, they're more likely to be held accountable for what they do.
So better treatment of workers, more sustainable practices, things like that.
Yeah, and fair dealings with everyone involved.
So it's a win-win, right? Good for business, good for consumers. But are there any downsides? Any challenges?
Well, sure. It's never that straightforward. One challenge is finding that balance between transparency and businesses needing to protect certain information.
Yeah, that makes sense. Like financial stuff that could give their competitors an advantage.
Exactly. So true transparency, it requires some thought, some nuance. It's not just about revealing everything.
It's about being strategic about what information is shared, right?
Yeah, providing the right information to consumers and stakeholders without hurting the business.
So technology could play a role here, right?
Definitely. Technology can be great for collecting and sharing information securely.
Like imagine a system where truckers can see all the data they need, right?
Yeah. Market rates, broker fees, all
Yeah.
of that in
Sure.
real time. They'd be able to make better decisions, negotiate fairer deals.
That would really give them a voice.
It would. And, this kind of technology, it could benefit brokers, too.
Oh, really?
More open marketplace, more efficient, streamlined communication,
Mhm.
build trust,
Yeah.
reduce disputes.
So technology could be the bridge, in a way, between the truckers and the brokers.
It's possible. But, we have to use it responsibly, make sure these solutions are fair.
Not making the power imbalance worse.
Right. This whole deep dive has been really eye-opening for me. I never knew how complicated the trucking industry was.
Me neither. And to think it all started with a simple question about transparency.
Yeah, but it goes so much deeper than that. Fairness, technology, the future of our whole supply chain.
It's all connected, isn't it?
It really is. And what happens here in the trucking world affects everyone.
What's the one thing you hope people take away from this?
Be curious. Be engaged. Ask questions. Use your voice to advocate for more transparency and fairness in all parts of your life.
That's a great message. We all have a part to play. Sometimes it starts with paying attention to the small stuff, like these contracts that, control how things move across the country.
It's in those details that we often find the problems and the solutions. By understanding those details, we can make better choices, make real change.
This has been a great conversation. Thanks for your insights.
My pleasure.
And to everyone listening, thanks for joining us for this deep dive into truck broker transparency. We hope you've learned something new.